Hi, welcome. I just finished working in this sketchbook, and we're going to go through it page by page, talk about the collages and artwork, and if that sounds like fun to you, then let's get started. I made this sketchbook back in July. I posted the making of on my channel, and it was a fun process. I do want to say that this is not a tutorial, okay? This is a journey. This is a journey video only because I do not fully remember the steps on how to make a book. A sort of key point that I don't want to be missed is that I used crappy paper because one of my failings when I make or buy sketchbooks with nice paper is that I tend not to use them as frequently and save the nice book for when I have really good ideas. One of the unintended consequences was there were instances where I needed to reinforce certain pages. So that's what this piece is. It's an abstract I made a while ago, and I thought it would be fun to pop it into this book. Another unintended consequence of using crappy paper is that I used the book so much more. I used it as a junk journal. I wrote diary entries, pasted in poems and quotes. You get the picture. This is all to say that there are some personal notes in here, which I'll be blurring periodically, so don't let that surprise you. Okay, with those housekeeping notes out of the way, let's really break into this sucker. This first page was begun by pasting down some watercolor paper. I just really wanted to do a fun loose floral. When I start sketchbooks, I have to do things to get myself to work in them, to essentially mess them up so that I feel less precious about them. Even using crappy paper, I needed to do this with this sketchbook as well. So I started off by pasting this moon shape on the page, and that was a problem for me to try to fix. The next thing I did was to draw out like dashed lines in a sort of curvilinear fashion. In those shapes that were created with the dashed line, I drew with a pen to make marks on the page. Nothing spectacularly deep about it, except as I went along, it more and more reminded me of space-time and the forces that hold the universe together. This next collage was created using National Geographic and a button from a magazine from the 60s. The button says, "End the war between the generations," and I really liked the casual way in which the older generation was sort of picking apart the younger generation. I wanted it to feel routine, as if it was a matter of course. The next page was a sketch study. I did it all in red pencil because I wanted to play with values in a very loose way. I was thinking a lot about loss and loneliness. Yeah, and I'm not great at figure drawing, so that was my attempt at a figure. The arm is sort of funky, the hands are too small. I think these are things that you notice later. And it's important to try to look back at your work and see what were the things that you were doing weird but at the time didn't really register because you were focused on other aspects of the work. The next page is a collection of scraps. I wanted to use them because I liked the colors and the overall shapes. It reminds me of cultivation and the ways that humans interact with the world. We have a tendency to select certain plants that we like and that we keep and we take care of. We do this inside and outside. I had seen some really cool sketches of artworks that had used really bright blocks of color to create landscapes, and I wanted to try that, but I also didn't want to do it on the whole page, so I drew myself a circle and made the artwork on the inside of that circle. And then around it, I sort of just colored it in to make it seem like a porthole, perhaps. Maybe we're looking at an alien landscape. I pasted in another one of my abstract pieces because I had painted and added a lot of water to the page before. I needed to reinforce it a bit. Because I wasn't super satisfied with the previous version of this where I did the color washes, I thought I would try again, and I like this one a little bit better. This next page is filled with a collage that is again sort of a response to having lots of torn pieces that I didn't really have a place for. I don't know if this is a godlike figure sort of watching what we're doing and how we're interacting with the world around us. Or maybe it's ourselves reflecting on how we engage with the world. Okay, now things got weird. I wanted to play with the idea of cutting out circles to reveal things behind. It was a risk. But again, it was a risk I was willing to take because I didn't care about this paper, and I had already done so many experiments in the book already that this just felt like not a big deal to do. I knew that I wanted to have some sort of eye in the very back, and this eye is sort of watching, mimicking the idea on the previous page. The next page uses an ad from an old magazine about a woman trying to get her tire changed. And I just really loved her kind of shocked expression. And as I was making this page, I was just getting lost in the idea of watching ourselves watching ourselves. It was getting meta. And I think that this collage is how I was feeling at the time. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety about the environment. There's this sense of deferred responsibility, and this collage is showing that. My next page is it's the eye. It's a psychedelic kind of looking eye. And I don't have a lot to say about this one other than it was a lot of fun to do. When I was a kid, I drew eyes all the time. I love the shape of them. I love what they mean to me. I think that eyes are just fascinating in and of themselves. And then doing this more psychedelic version of an eye with all of these color patches and squiggles and stuff. It felt like it was a lot of fun to do. And my anxiety about the environment just continues onto the next page. I know a lot of my work revolves around this idea, and unapologetically so. It is something that I care about. We all have to care about something, don't we? And I thought it would be kind of a fun juxtaposition to have this, what would normally be a large mammal, in a room with a lot of cultivated plants. In my mind, he's looking into the wilderness that's beyond. He's looking for escape. Gotta be honest, by the time I got to this page, I was sort of burnt out on the idea. So this next collage is a collage that I did a video about. If you want to check that video out, it is here. But the idea here was to play with scale. Nothing super fancy, just a good fun collage. If I were to critique this, which I think you should do with your art periodically, I would say I think that the kids just don't really stand out a whole lot on this background. So because they don't really stand out, I think that this one is really easy to just pass over without even noticing some of the silliness of the scale. This next page is another study of that same idea of color blocks that would represent vegetation. But I sort of gave up on the idea halfway through and started drawing individual plants, and then I started hating this page. So I pasted a poem down in the center to try to cover up some of it. For me, this poem means that even beautiful things, even wildflowers, can be misunderstood and rejected. But if I can believe in the wildflowers, if I can defend the wildflowers, why shouldn't I defend, love, and believe in myself? The next page is another poem that I pasted, and I won't really talk about this one. It's just a poem. The next page of this sketchbook is another example of how I like to upcycle. So in this case, I had been making a collage using old pieces of artwork, and I had torn up some artwork that I made in the past. A friend of mine who saw it mentioned that they thought it sort of reminded them of an hourglass, which was interesting. I don't know that that's how I see it. But I love that about art. There is a lot of ways that you can see art. A lot of art making is a collaboration between the viewer and the artist, or the artwork itself. All of these black lines were made by some new pens that I had purchased, and I wanted to test them out. And once I had finished doing that on this page, I thought it looked fine, but it wasn't necessarily something that I was obsessed with. So I kept messing with it and adding layers on top of it. Another friend who was looking at this said that they kind of thought of the pen marks as the human element. All of the pieces layered on top was true nature, and things that are more natural are more satisfying in the long run. And I love that. I think that's really fun. A really cool way to think about it. It's definitely not what I was thinking when I made it. But again, it's really cool that just because I didn't think of it doesn't mean that's not what that couldn't mean to someone else. I was watching the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Running Man, and there was a lot of propaganda produced by the state, by the corporations. Yeah, it felt really real to me. So I started planning out some things that I thought I could maybe upcycle, make like a bag or something that says toxic since 2017, because that was when the movie was supposed to have been set, I think, if I remember correctly. I think we all have pages like this. There's just nothing really great about it. So I had this template that I had used to make bunting sitting on my desk, so I pasted it in as, again, another problem to solve for myself, only I never really came up with a good idea here, so I just wrote a quote down, and it's fine, but it's not that pretty, it's not that interesting. Not every page can be a banger, you know what I mean? I also used the sketchbook to write down some ideas, so I had this idea that maybe I would do collages based on decades. This next page is one of those interesting ones where I didn't really have a whole lot of thoughts when I was making it, but friends later who saw it had all kinds of thoughts. A friend of mine mentioned that they thought it kind of seemed like this was the bird's eye view of the world, and all that red and wavy lines in the background is sort of like global warming. It was an interesting idea, and definitely not one that I was thinking about when I made this page. I just genuinely had this globe that I wasn't going to use in anything else. I had cut out this bird and hadn't used it for ages, so I thought before it gets any more damaged from me shuffling it between pages, I'll just paste it in here. And yeah, that's how this collage came to be. But I love that someone else saw something that I didn't see or wasn't necessarily intending. So I have a bunch of magazines about photography, and I was really excited to find a couple pages just about movie making. This came from the 1970s, and there were some good ideas in it. It's essentially a how-to. This next page is wild. It was a problem page. I had drawn something on it, and then I hated what I drew. So I started pasting anything I could find on top. And what I think I kind of maybe ended up with was this interesting composition where there's these elf-like people who are creating structure out of the chaos around them. This was a mess of a page. My next page is a collage that you can actually see the whole making of. I think that the background is so much more interesting than the alien sort of flowers that I created on top. They seem so much more static than what's going on behind them. And it's never really good whenever you create something where you think, I like the background better. But hey, it happens, and I think this was a fun page to make. On the next page, I just wanted to lay down colors. I didn't love it. I ended up drawing on top of the darker shades so that it would look more like a landscape. That was what I was going for originally, and it just really wasn't showing very well. Here is another experiment. However, the paper was a little less waxy, so there's only a few spots where it did the fun droplet thing that I liked so much. And because this wasn't working out quite the way I was hoping, I just sort of drew a few flowers and let that be the end of it. And I think this ended up looking kind of cool. If I had different things within the flower center shapes, maybe it would be even more interesting. This next one, it was a bit of fun. It was a bit cheeky. And the friend that was looking at it were wondering whether or not we were the cows, and were we being fed a steady diet of sweets and sugars to keep us distracted. Is it a message of hope? Or is it a message that we are being fed something that is not really good for us? This next page was a fail. I don't know. I tried to go back to it a few times. I tried to fix it. But I don't know, just nothing was right. And you ever just like get a page that annoys you? This is that for me. This next page was an attempt to use some cast-off bits from a room. There was actually 2 rooms, and I was trying to kind of fit them together in sort of this jigsaw puzzly sort of way to create an interesting composition, but also to play with the idea of being in 2 places at once. And I literally told myself that, 2 places at once. And to me, it sort of is bringing this idea of fractured attention. We are often asked to be in 2 places at once, in the physical, real world, and then also in the digital world. This collage of shapes was an experiment. I just kind of wanted to see if this could look good. The lines were a later addition after I was kind of not liking it, but I thought, oh, maybe I'll draw lines. The lines sort of led me to adding this shape at the bottom. And because it's a circle, maybe it kind of seems like a world, and maybe all the lines are connecting and showing us pieces of the world. There's not a whole lot about it that I really like. Something that I think about when I look at this is the path to adulthood, and growth is not linear. It's oftentimes sideways. We go back and forth. I made these next couple of pages while I was listening to documentaries about Henry Matisse, and it was a fun practice just to listen and kind of mindlessly create as I went along. In a lot of good ways, I think that this is very unlike anything else in the sketchbook, so that's quite fun. I love her final kind of look and expression here. You know, she is really she's over it. And I think she's quite comfortable in her own space. I started off by drawing shapes and then filling those shapes in with whatever I felt like. I think that maybe the result sort of looks like a collection of interdimensional TVs. I had cut out this image of hands, but I hadn't used it for ages. I didn't know what to do with it. The hands were holding a little flower in black and white, and I thought it would look better with a pop of color. It doesn't mean anything. Just something I wanted to do to just give it a little bit more life. I thought it would be fun to try to make little creatures out of the shapes from an old abstract piece of art. I think they might be one of my favorite things in the book. They are so random and so kind of silly. I think it would be fun maybe if I did this again, but a little bit more on purpose. Again, another one of my abstract pieces that I pasted in. I just think that anytime I was bereft of something to do, I started my day by pasting one of these in my workbook just to give myself a feeling of accomplishment. It's sort of like the art version of having a checklist and then writing down, make a checklist on the checklist to check that off, your checklist. This is a collage that is telling you my feelings in the moment, and it's this feeling of overwhelming pressure. Not that I was intentionally thinking about it that way at the time. It also has this environmental message. A lot of my work does. In a previous video, I talked about how I would show you the final of this collage. I don't know that it's anything to really write home about, but it was a fun project to do. There was really no pressure involved with it. Very much just find scraps and make composition. But I really liked this practice. I thought it was fun, and if you want to do something like it, I definitely recommend. I think you could probably do it even better than this, so go forth and use your scraps. I had this image of the moon. There probably is another better way to use this moon, but it reminded me of a dandelion flower after it has gone to seed, and then I couldn't get that out of my head. On the next page, I was playing with some watercolors. It was fun to play around and just make kind of billowing shapes with it. A friend of mine mentioned that they thought it sort of looked like the beginning of an adventure. They saw like a little boat at the very bottom bobbing along. I wasn't intentionally trying to add anything that would look like a boat, So that's fun that they saw that. And it's fun that now that they said that, I see that. This next collage is all about the interaction between wildlife and the world. There are the extremes of the weather, but also the human environments that are created and act upon them as well. This next page was just a bunch of little sketches. These are fantasy landscapes. I was actually hanging out with a friend this day and we were just kind of playing in our sketchbooks and making stuff. This next page was inspired by another artist on YouTube, Orla Stevens. She was doing some studies of cityscapes and I don't know, I just kind of wanted to draw some non-organic shapes in here and just play with that idea. So I made a mess for myself with all of these like crazy colors. Then I just on top of it drew with pen. It's very squiggly, very weird looking, but inorganic shapes are quite fun to draw sometimes. This next page is some more fantasy flowers, pure play. On this next spread, I was still in my paint and pastel season, I guess. So I just completely covered the page. A friend of mine who's colorblind actually mentioned that this reminded them a lot of how they see the world as more like collections of shadow and light. I loved hearing that I was able to capture something that connected with them. Around this time, I heard a poem, If, and it was by Rudyard Kipling. And some of the quote that I wrote was, "If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, yours is the earth and everything that's in it." Yo, man, this next page. I don't know, genuinely a bunch of nonsense here. It could be bugs flying around, it could be flowers, I don't know. I started drawing on it, hated what I was drawing, and so I took some paper that is typically used to make book cloth. It's not like your typical paper. So when I glue it down, it creates this really lovely semi-translucent cover. And you would think that then I would put on top of it something really cool and awesome, but instead I just scribbled some more. I will say I like how the red on this page sort of echoes against the red on the other page. And on the other page, I made a video about this. It's true crime whodunit collage. It's a really fun collage. It's a little too bad it's opposite of this absolutely ridiculous page, but you know, it is what it is. I truly thought I would paint this, but I am so afraid to paint it and ruin it, so it's just remained a sketch. And I pasted it in my sketchbook so that I would stop stumbling over it in the studio and potentially lose it or accidentally drop glue or paint on it, because your girl is not very organized, so I was nervous for its safety. This next page is a collection of faces. All of them were pulled from Vanity Fair. Nothing really to note here other than sometimes it's just a fun practice to Frankenstein bodies together and play with the human shape. I've seen people do this with like blobs of paint and then drawing on top of the paint to make like cats. So I did this. I made blobs of paint. But I thought, you know what I'm going to do? One of these, at least one of these, reminded me of a sea creature, so I started that idea. I realized halfway down the page that I don't actually know that many sea creatures in order to draw them. I got the legs all weird on this guy down in the corner, and I tried to do a hammerhead shark, but I don't actually know what those look like. Like, I kind of know what they look like. But man, the second I started drawing it, I was like, uh-oh. This next page was splatters of paint that I used pen on top of to sort of pull it into a landscape composition. This was a lot of fun to do. I think the colors were really pretty. I did a lot of like splatters on it to kind of give it a hazy look. And the result, I think, was quite fun. This page is just some dreaming that I was doing. This next page was a page that I was so excited to do because I have been holding on to these ladies' heads for ages. They have been sitting in a folder and I was waiting to try to find a dog calendar. I thought that would be so easy to find at like an estate sale or something, but I have not been able to find a dog calendar. So eventually I thought, you know what? I have this body of a bear, so I'm gonna do this idea. My idea was to make like a lady-headed Cerberus. So I did the bear. And I think this works. Probably one of my favorite collages, maybe just because it took me so long to get here and I have been like thinking about this collage for a while. This next page is built entirely out of scraps, and something that I do when I visit places is I pick up maps and I try to paste them in notebooks and stuff just so that I have this sort of lovely reminder of places that I've been. I just think maps are really fun in general. I had initially thought I would do more with this page, but honestly, I just like the way that it looks as is. In one of the National Geographics, there was this really cool ad about these crash test dummies, and they're really creepy. So I loved the idea of them sort of sitting in front of this apocalyptic looking scene. So I thought it was really fun to play with the idea of, you know, what makes life. You have like this primordial scene in the background, these crash test dummies whose existence are responsible for likely many lives, right? Because they were created in order to test cars and their safety features. So yeah, I don't know. I thought these two things together was sort of interesting. And also the lady looking at us is absolutely terrifying. In fact, all of them are quite creepy, but the lady in particular is freaking me out. This last collage I really like because of the hands in particular. To me, it says that the forces in the world that lift us up are also the forces that can press us down. And there is a balance between those two things, and one that we have to balance every day. And the final page is just a collection of bits and bobs that I liked but didn't have any place for in particular. If you've made it this far, then let me reiterate how thankful I am. It can be a vulnerable thing to share my art, and I appreciate everyone who watches and comments. I also want to say, if you have been thinking about getting more into art practice, don't be nervous to just doodle and paint and glue your way into it. And don't sweat the small stuff. Okay, bye! See ya! Bye! Bye! Bye!